You know, a lot of times you have to choose between something high quality or something that saves you money. But if you can get both, why not? Especially when it comes to healthcare. And that's MediShare. You get both. The typical family saves $500 a month switching to MediShare. And that's huge. But it's also true that people are way more satisfied after making the switch too. The customer satisfaction rate for MediShare is double that of the typical health insurance plan. Double. It's because MediShare works. It's been around for more than a quarter century, and members have shared more than $3 billion of each other's bills. People love having telehealth and a huge PPO network. So yeah, really, you could save a ton and like it better. Imagine being happy with how you're taking care of your health care. If you're self-employed or part of the gig economy, or you just want a plan you're happy with, you can call right now and get a price within 2 minutes. Here is the number you need. Call 833-32-BIBLE. That's 833-32-BIBLE. 833-32-BIBLE.
Social media's changed everything. From the time I first ran for mayor in 2003 to when I left in 2018 was a completely different world. And that world, no secret to anybody, it's one where, you know, the one who has the most clever put down wins, or supposedly wins, but yet nothing ever gets solved. Governing at its best is about solving problems. And yet we're in a world where after a debate is over, the commentators all come back with, well, who had the best one-liner? As if that had anything at all to do with running the state or the country.
This is CIA, Contagious Influencers of America, from the producers of Keep the Faith, the #1 faith-based show in all of America. I'm David Sams. You know, normally the guests that I have on this show are people that have basically national or international recognition. We've had some just amazing guests on the show, and they get better and better. This time I decided to have the former governor of the state of Tennessee on, Bill Haslam. Now, all of us here in Tennessee, we know Governor Haslam. You know, he was a great governor, a 2-term governor. Prior to that, he was the mayor of Knoxville. But some of you outside of the state, you've probably never heard of him before, but you're going to, because he has stepped up his game. He has stepped up his game. He actually wrote a book that is so needed at this point in time, because politics has just become just so crazy. Everything's so polarizing. Everything is very tribal. It's us against them against us, this network against that network. It's everybody fighting online and social media. And Haslam, well, he just recognized all that, and he came up with an instruction manual in a very, it's a great read. Actually, I didn't read it, okay? I did something else, and I'm going to reveal what that is here in just a moment. In the interview itself, because I wanted to really take it in, and I wanted him to help me take it in. So we'll get to that in a minute. But the book is called Faithful Presence, The Promise and the Peril of Faith in the Public Square. This is an outstanding book. He's an outstanding gentleman. So let's get right to the interview with the former governor of the great state of Tennessee, Bill Haslam. Well, welcome.
Good to be here. Thank you. We look forward to this.
I will have to tell you, I did not read your book, but I listened to your audiobook.
Oh, good. Oh, well, that's good.
I just love audiobooks, especially when the author actually reads it.
Well, I am the same way. I about half of the books that I consume, I do on audio. And then somebody said, hey, if you'll do it yourself, people tend to like it better. And I thought, well, I'm not going to write a lot of books, so I might as well do it with this one.
Well, you know, when the pandemic started, I started walking a lot. And I walk several miles a day now.
Same.
And I love audiobooks while walking.
Same. It's for me, I still try to run, although it's more of a forward-leaning walk these days. But that's the way to distract myself while I'm exercising.
So when did you write this?
Really wrote it kind of off and on through 2020. Had kind of been thinking about doing it and jumped into it, I guess, like I said, in January of 2020, right before COVID hit. And so one of the few good byproducts of COVID was it took away all my excuses, and I had to sit there and actually write it and get it done.
What inspired you to specifically focus on the content?
I think this, I had the privilege of serving in offices, 2 terms as mayor and 2 terms as governor. And and I loved it. One of the things that was disappointing to me was that people of faith, Christians, acted just like everyone else in the public square. And we're clearly called to be different. And I saw that we were just as likely to be, rude and arrogant on the internet. We were just as likely to hide behind the internet to say things we would never say in person. We were just as likely to not listen to the other side of the argument and to only try to get our side of the argument across. And again, I think we're clearly called to be different, and being different means being different everywhere, in business, in the home, and in the public square.
Not necessarily put ourselves above everyone else.
That's the point. That's the point. Is the rest of the world is acting like I'm right, you're wrong. Mm-hmm. We of all people should know part of what we believe is we're fallen, broken people. We know that about ourselves. So if that's true, we know that even in these arguments we enter or discussions we enter into in the public square, that we might not have it exactly right. I mean, I haven't had it exactly right in anything else I've done today. There's a decent chance I don't have it exactly right when I think about what views I hold in the public square.
Mm-hmm. The one thing that really hit me as I was listening to this last night, because it's such just great advice, practical advice, and you connect a lot of dots, is that I started thinking, this should be not only required reading, but you should go on the road and teach young people who are thinking of getting into politics with the wisdom that you've had and the leadership you've had and the experience you've had. I'm talking about the especially Christian folks that are thinking about getting into politics. This should be required reading.
Well, thank you. I wrote it not just for folks who are actually thinking about running themselves, but for all of us, because we're all a part of the public square. We all hopefully are voters. We all engage with people around us on issues that matter to us. And so it's really for all of us. But for those who are thinking about running for office, I do spend some time talking about some things that are uniquely challenging. Mm-hmm. You led into this really well. We're supposed to be people who know the story's not about us. And we're instructed to do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit, but with humility consider others greater than yourselves. Okay, if I said, that's the advice, do nothing from humility or conceit, but consider others greater than yourselves, find me a political consultant who will give you that advice, mm-hmm, right? Mm-hmm. It just doesn't fit, because part of running for office is raising your hand saying, I'm the man or I'm the woman. So how do we, in a world like that, how do we live in a way that thinks of others as better than ourselves?
When did it become so contentious? Maybe it always has been, but I remember, especially in the 80s, I was in L.A. doing my shows.
Right.
And, Reagan was president.
Right.
And it just seemed like, the biggest controversy was whether or not, Nancy's running the White House and whether she's bringing in
who the astrologer was, right? We're the same age, I can tell.
Actually, I think we're 2 weeks apart.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, first of all, we should be realistic. It has always been contentious. Andrew Jackson, president from a few miles down the road from where we are now, on his deathbed, they said, do you have any regrets? And he wasn't kidding. He said, yes, I wish I had shot Clay and hung Calhoun. Mm-hmm. Well, Calhoun was his vice president and Clay was the Speaker of the House. And he wasn't kidding. That was his regret. So it's always been that way. Here's what's different. The wide availability of different news options through, because wherever your political views are, you can find some news show that reflects that, and we all like to be told that what we already think is true. So we have confirmation bias. We hear stuff and we go, "See, I'm right," but we get to pick the news that we listen to that's going to tell us what we want to hear. That's one big difference. And the second is, social media has changed everything. From the time I first ran for mayor in 2003 to when I left in 2018 was a completely different world. And that world, no secret to anybody, it's one where, the one who has the most clever put down wins, or supposedly wins, but yet nothing ever gets solved. And so that's part of my fear today is, governing at its best is about solving problems.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we're in a world where, the person who has, after a debate is over, the commentators all come back with, well, who had the best one-liner? As if that had anything at all to do with running the state or the country.
I liken the whole political landscape now. I'm a big Ohio State guy.
I saw that. Well, there's a 12-step program for that.
When we do our pictures later, I'm going to get you holding an Ohio State mug.
I don't know.
Because if you're ever going to run for the White House, they say you got to win Ohio.
Ohio's pretty important, but I'm not planning on that. So I'll have to weigh whether it's worth holding the Ohio State mug or not.
But here's the deal. I'm always thinking politics has turned in like that. Ohio State versus
Michigan.
I didn't say it, you did.
You do have it bad, don't you? It might take more than a 12-step
We're
program.
very tribal.
Yes, you named it.
There's no give and take. There's no middle ground. It's like we're drawing the line in the sand, and it's either our way or the highway. There's no compromise at all.
Yeah. You couldn't be more right. Tribal is the right word, okay? And so we're broken up into all these different tribes. Here's, again, my book is trying to remind people, what does Scripture tell us we should act like? And James is writing, and he talks about earthly wisdom, and then he contrasts that with wisdom that's from above, and that's obviously the kind of wisdom we're supposed to have. And he says, wisdom that's above is pure, peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy, sincere, and impartial. Now, if I went out and said, you and I we left here and went to the restaurant down at the intersection of the interstate, and we walked around and said, what are Christians like in the public square? Not many would say open to reason, impartial, sincere, pure, peaceful, full of mercy. That's just not how we would be described. And I think the problem is we think, and you probably have listeners right now going, Bill, that all sounds really nice and very Sunday school, but that's just not how it works. Mm-hmm. If we do that, it's like bringing a pillow to a knife fight. Mm-hmm. And all this matters too much. This just matters too much to act that way. And I'd say, well, those aren't my words. Those are the words that God's given us through Scripture. And we don't give people a pass in other areas of life. In other words, I say, in your business, you need to act ethically until you're on the edge of bankruptcy. Then you should do whatever you need to survive. Or in your marriage, you should be faithful unless the woman in the cubicle next to you is really hot. Mm-hmm. And then you get a pass. Mm-hmm. We don't give ourselves those passes, but somehow in the public square, we haven't developed a theology that talks about, well, what should we act like in the public square?
What is it that we have to do? Because you actually talk about in your book, which but then again, I highly recommend to people that you get the audio book because you're great at delivering.
And I get an extra 50 cents since I read it myself every time you sell one of those.
You say that Christians end up shaping their faith to fit their politics rather than forming their politics to their faith.
Right. Well, and that what I just talked about would be my example is we haven't developed a theology, and theology is just like, how should this work about the public square? Mm-hmm. And so we've done things like I said. We've said, I can be as mean as I want on the internet because it's the internet and that's how it works, and then I will justify shaping my faith to fit that, to justify what I'm doing. Okay, that would be an example. Instead of saying, well, here's what I believe, here's who the God who I say I am going to follow, here's how he's telling me to act, therefore I'm going to act in that way.
You know what amazes me? Well, it doesn't amaze me. Generally, it just follow the money. A lot of these things that we fight for, we're driven by what we are told to be driven by. And many times those things are driven by donor money.
I think that's true. But actually, I would actually point to a bigger root cause is popular opinion can get going in a direction. And it's pretty easy to put your flag up there and see which way it's blowing and then go in that direction too. And due to again, social media and so many other things, there's a lot of just misinformation out there instead of people digging in and saying, well, what's the truth here? And it's really easy for a politician to say, the money's really nice, but to be honest with you, in today's world where there's so many ways to get your message out, it's a lot easier just to catch the wind. And the wind's blowing that way, I'm going to go get with it and move. And I think that's the bigger temptation for people in public office today.
Well, I'm specifically talking about, let's say, a gay marriage.
Okay.
I remember that was a big contentious deal back a few years back, and there was a lot of money being raised to fight that. Right. And then the Supreme Court ruled, and it went away. I mean, for the most part, it was like this daily just bombardment in social media and news outlets and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and all this money was being raised to on both sides.
Yeah, for sure.
And then all of a sudden the Supreme Court rules, and it's like, let's move on to the next thing we can raise money about or over.
Well, actually, your point is dead on that. I'll agree with you there. I'll give you an example today, okay? If I ask you, what is the United States policy on immigration, what would you say?
There isn't one.
Bingo. And there isn't one for two reasons. First, it's really complex. Like if I said, you're probably like me, you want to have a policy that respects our borders and is humane and treats people as created in the image of God, but also says a border is a border and should be respected. Those are two kind of fundamentals, and we'll go from there. Now, working that out is really hard and it's complex, and it will probably mean some give and take on the two sides. The second reason it doesn't get solved is just what you said. Both sides raise a lot of money on it. Democrats send out mailers saying Republicans, we're keeping, President Trump was keeping people in kids in cages, and Republicans send out messages saying Democrats are just welcoming anybody to come across the border as they like. Both sides take an issue like that and they raise money and they raise passion off of it. And raising passion is just as important as raising money. Your point is great in this, where nothing is conducive to an atmosphere that says, let's actually solve the problem. There's no motivation for anyone to solve the problem, A, because it's hard, and B, because it takes away a money-raising position.
As a Christian, did you ever, what were the most difficult decisions that you had to make as governor, that where you really had a tug of war with your faith?
There are several. I mean, some of the ones you feel the most, there's always things where you're wrestling with your faith. So you're putting a budget together, right? And in tough budget times, you're maybe having to take away funding from a program that you think that program is helping people. But you're like a family, the state, unlike the federal government, has to balance their budget. And like a family, there's things you don't do that you would like to do. And so those are really difficult. The most personal actually had to do with the governor's role in the legal and judicial system. And so the governor is not as powerful as everyone thinks he or she is, because there's a legislature and there's the judicial branch and there's constitutional officers. So your power is appropriately, I think, checked in many ways. The one place where the governor has almost unlimited power is around the power to grant clemency, pardons, to commute sentences. And there, unless you're being paid for something, you can do almost whatever you want. So if the governor says, I want everybody out of every Tennessee state prison in the next 24 hours, that would happen. So you have this incredible power. Two places that came up. One was on death penalty cases. Tennessee still, some states have outlawed the death penalty. We haven't. It's part of the law of the land that I sort of uphold. But the governor does have a role being the last voice that that can intervene in the system. I personally looked at it as it wasn't my role to be the 13th juror, that a jury of this person's peers had made a decision. They had, in most cases, literally 40 years worth of appeals or 30 years worth of appeals. But it's when you're the last phone call from the warden to say, we are getting ready to to carry out the sentence, that's heavy. Likewise, you have, like I said, you have the power to give pardons or commute sentences. And some former governors had told me, listen, people, you won't believe how many people are going to come out of the woodwork. Some that, have a relative that's got a life sentence, some that is just a college buddy you knew that got a DUI that wants it taken off of his record. And you're going to be flooded with that. So wait until the last to decide, to make those decisions. And so I said, okay, that makes sense to me. I don't want to be dealing with that for my whole 8 years. So we waited till the last 4 months, and it was a huge mistake because it was so much harder than I thought it would be. So a case comes before you and you think, I can figure that out. They were sentenced to, life, but, we could commute the sentence to 40 years, or they got a DUI and we're going to recommend that, or we're going to get it taken off their record. In every case, trying to be both merciful and just at the same time was so much harder than I thought it would be. Literally the first 2 meetings I had with the legal team where they brought in, 20 cases each day, every one of them I said, that's a hard one. I need to think about that some. Because those situations are just so hard. And one of the things, I talk about this in the book, is it taught me is it is hard to be just and merciful at the same time. It's one of the things that gives me a great new appreciation for the cross, that we have a God that knew he had to be just because he's a holy God, but loved us enough to want to be merciful and do it at the same time. And that's why the picture of what happened on the cross is, again, even more amazing to me. But if you ask, what are those things that you just personally struggle with the most, those would be those legal, judicial issues would be at the top.
So take me back. Where did you form these ideas? Give me a little bit about your early years.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in Knoxville, Tennessee. Never ever thought. Some people think, well, I'd like to run for office someday. I was not that guy. I was in business in high school. I came to faith in Christ in high school. The guy had been kind of my mentor, had graduated from the same high school, gone to college, came back, taught at that high school, and then was going to go to seminary. And so that kind of felt like, I like that path. And so that was my plan. I went to college, was a history major, thinking I'm going to be a teacher and then go into seminary, and graduated, started applying for jobs, got several jobs. My father was in business and said, if you're really thinking about you're going to be in the ministry, you should come in business for a couple of years. It'll give you a better picture of the world, and you'll be better able to relate to the people in your congregation. You already know what high schools are like. You've been in one. So I said, well, that kind of makes sense. And so I went in business for 2 years and stayed for 20, kind of waiting for the next thing. And in the meantime, became convinced that being a pastor was not what I was called to do. But kind of the whole time was thinking, this business isn't what I want to do with my entire life. And after about 20 years in business, some folks approached me and said, would you run for mayor of Knoxville, Tennessee? And I said, oh, you got the wrong guy. And they said, well, you should think and pray about that. And it's kind of hard to say, well, no, I won't even think and pray about it. But did, and I had a group of 5 other guys that I had met with every Friday morning for 20 years, and brought the idea up to them. And I thought they would laugh like I did. And they all kind of leaned forward and nodded, said, we should pray seriously about that. Chrissy, my wife, had the same reaction. So decided to run for mayor and loved it. Just loved. I mean, it's just, you've always heard about calling. Well, this kind of felt like what I was called to do. It felt like home. And it felt like a great way to serve. And I tell people I thought I was going to be the CEO of the city, and it felt more like being the senior pastor of the city. I wasn't giving sermons in the town square, but in terms of just a pure way to serve people. I loved it. So after 2 terms as mayor, the open seat for governor, and did the same thing, kind of talked to people I knew, and a lot of folks were encouraging me to think about it, prayed about it. And Chrissy and I, as Chrissy said many times, I'm confident we're called to run. We'll see if we're called to serve. That's what an election determines. and ran and won. And like I said, the 8 years I was governor were just, for us, just joy-filled years of feeling like God has called us to this point in this place and time.
You thought about becoming a pastor back in the early days. So what are you doing now?
That's a really good question. So several things. So I'm, when you leave office, everybody says, don't say yes to everybody that asks you to do everything. And I didn't follow that advice as well. So I've ended up on several different boards, some for-profit, some not-for-profit. We're still involved in a lot of things that we care deeply about, a lot of education issues that are kind of at the heart of the things we focused on during the time we were in office. And then several ministry boards as well that are very important to us. And then have kind of wandered back into some business involvement. I'm not doing it full time, but there's some investment things that we've taken an interest in.
Well, what about that pastor thing that
you
had
know
on your heart?
That's so. What's so interesting is one of the nice things about writing a book is you end up engaged in conversations all the time. And I told Chrissy, I said, I feel like I'm in more fruitful discussions today than ever in my life. And from old friends who read the book and have called to people that just I'm in association one way or the other. So, in the end, I think God calls all of us to be pastors in some way. It just looks different. Like for you, it looks like being able to reach into the homes of, thousands of people with the message that you care about. For me, it's ended up being in a lot of relationships that some because I was in office, some I've just known from business, and some that quite frankly have been sparked out of this book.
As I was listening to your audiobook last night, I thought to myself, because you have this like folksy way about you, and I thought you really ought to be doing some kind of an ongoing, not commentary, but storytelling.
Yeah.
That's a couple of minutes a day, whatever, and just share your thoughts, share your ideas, share the times that we did figure out a way to get along. Connect some dots for us, encourage us. That's one thing we do on our radio show, Keep the Faith. And the reason that we are the number one show in America.
Right.
Okay. There's one reason. We're all about encouraging people, giving people hope, sharing ideas, combining those ideas with music, with song, because there's nothing more powerful.
No question.
I'll just be honest with you. We don't take a position on a thing.
Sure.
That's just not our...
Not what your mission is.
That's not what our mission is. And therefore, we don't lose 50% of our audience.
Yeah.
Because the minute you take a position on anything, I mean, by the way, there's a place to do that,
right?
And there's conservative talk radio. There's Christian talk teach radio. I mean, there's all other forms.
You got it.
But when it comes to Christian music radio, you've got all kinds of people tuning in, and you've got all kinds of markets. A market like Atlanta is highly urban.
Sure.
So you do not want to go there. And there's so many other places to go by encouraging, especially now after this pandemic. People need encouragement.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I think the amount of despair in our culture today is palpable. And we see it, right? You see it in everything from suicides to opiate overdoses, et cetera. But even if with folks who maybe aren't at that point, there's just a lot of, I don't know a better word than despair. And so I think that's part of the ministry that folks like you have. It's not your call to be out debating, whether the last COVID, $1 trillion COVID relief plan is a good idea. That's not what we got. Plenty of people doing that. So I'm glad you're doing what you're doing. In terms of me doing it, I could do it, but unlike you, that has hundreds of thousands of listeners, I would have my wife and maybe 2 of my 3 kids that would listen, maybe on their way to do something else.
So first of all, you did not need a day job when you decided to enter politics, right?
Right.
And it's one thing to have all your buddies and folks say, "Hey, you know what? You'd be pretty good at this." What was it that really got you? That was in your heart that you said,
question.
"You know what? I've got to go from running the family business and being very successful at it,
right, to
dealing with city government.
That's a great. You're good at this. You might want to think about doing this questioning thing for a living. It was this. There's a passage in Jeremiah 29 where the Israelites are being held captive in Babylon. So, Nebuchadnezzar, bad place, right? I mean, it's not where you want to be held captive. And Jeremiah is back in Jerusalem. He writes to them. And I always tell folks, like, if you ever write to me and I'm held captive, I hope the message is, hang tight, we're coming to get you. But his message was, you're going to be there a while. So build houses, plant gardens, marry your children, have your children have children. And then he ends with, seek the welfare of the place where I have called you, for in its welfare you will find yours. Or actually, I'm sorry, I said, seek the peace of the place where I have called you, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. So to me, that was this really clear call from God of like to seek the peace of the place where he has called us. And for me, it was a city that I'd grown up in that I cared deeply about, and I'd been involved in a lot of things in the community. A friend of mine, Bob Corker, who later went on to be a senator from Tennessee, had just recently been elected mayor of Chattanooga. And he said, hey, Bill, have you served on this board, done this and that? And I said, yeah. And he goes, you can make 10 times as much difference being a mayor in terms of really helping people as you can in any of those things. And that kind of grabbed me. And he ended up being exactly right. I mean, it was 100% right. And it's the thing I love best about those jobs.
Did you have more fun being the mayor or the governor?
That's a really good question. They're similar jobs. They're both executive jobs. Mayor, you can kind of wrap your arms around. You live in the city. You can be in the middle of it. You see people all day long, and that's wonderful. But it's also sometimes not so wonderful because you're if there's an event, people expect the mayor to be there. Governor's a little different, right? If they're having a strawberry festival in West Tennessee and a blueberry festival in East Tennessee, people realize he can't be everywhere. So there's a little different expectation level. I was kidding about that part, but with governor, the wonderful thing, the state does so much. I mean, we educate 4-year-olds and PhDs. We build interstates. We run prisons. We help families with mental health issues. We have college. We think about all the different things we do. So that was fascinating for me to have so many different areas of impact and things that happen. My wife, Chrissy, says I have a little bit of adult ADD, and the fact that we dealt with so many different things and it was always something new every 15 minutes kind of fed me for good ways and not so good ways too.
Well, as the governor, though, you get to blow through traffic lights and have police escort, right?
You do. You get driven everywhere by a trooper, and it is. Well, I'll put it this way: it's. Do you remember in Lord of the Rings when Gandalf shows up in the Shire, and Frodo says you're late, and Gandalf says a wizard is never late and a wizard's never early. A wizard's right on time, and that's kind of how it is with governor. You're usually right on time, one, because if you're late, the troopers are driving about 120 miles per hour to get there, and second, the event's probably not going to start without you. So you do get used to some creature comforts. I'll say that.
We hear all the time that politics has become such a rough game that why would anybody in their right mind, why would anybody with a family, why would anybody that already has a life, why in the world would they give that up to run for office? And I know there are people listening to this right now who, they've always thought, well, I could do some good and I could run for, let's say, city council, but man, I just can't deal with all the craziness.
It can be crazy, and it can be messy, and it can be ambiguous in terms of, it's not you're not always dealing with issues that feel like it's black and white, like, oh, I know the exact right thing to do there. And it because of that, there's a messiness. But Martin Luther wrote, and again, I don't have the quote exactly right, but Luther wrote, he said, send your very best into public service where they have to deal with the ambiguity of issues. He says, in preaching, the Holy Spirit does all the work. But in public service, you have to have folks who can weave their way through. I don't remember the exact quote, but you see where he was going with that. I think that's right. I mean, it's the very messiness of it, to me, is part of the call, because we do want people who are there for the right reasons. And you talked about earlier about not taking positions on every issue that comes down the road. One of the things that I think I've come to see, and believe, I'm a Republican and have strong views about a lot of things, but I've actually come to divide people in public service more by, are they there to actually make a difference and to serve for the right reasons, or are they there to make a point and draw an audience? And you have a lot of those second ones who are, making a point's easy, making a difference is harder. Getting an audience is fairly easy in politics. I mean, you can build up a social media network really fast. Actually doing something to serve people and solve the problem is a lot harder. And in my mind, like I said, believe me, I'm still philosophically and ideologically in the same place, but I have come to almost more divide people into those two camps.
We're in a weird situation right now where we've been in this pandemic thing for the last year and a half, and a lot of people have lost a sense of community. A lot of folks have stopped going to church. We're used to now rolling out of bed and having a cup of coffee and in our underwear and glancing at church online, or maybe we don't even watch it on Sunday. It's Tuesday night, or every other week or whatever. Right. And so there's been this huge loss of human connection, in some states more so than others. And I'm just wondering, because I've been talking to a number of folks about this, is it going to look different going forward than it has in the past? Is this a good time to pivot, to look at things a little differently than just getting back to where we were 2 years ago? How do we bring people back together again, but realize that the world has, in fact, changed? Attitudes have changed.
It's such a great question that I think there's a lot of churches and businesses and ministries and everything else trying to figure out the answer to it. There's no question in my mind that some of our habits will change. There will be some travel that people used to do. There will be some other things that folks have said, I can do that through the same way you're communicating this show and have been for years, okay? And they can do meetings over Zoom, et cetera. All that being said, I do think there's a longing, I think the part of what is we're created for as humans is relationship. And I think people are longing for those relationships. And, particularly when it comes to church, Hebrews is really clear, let us consider how to encourage one another, not forsaking our own assembling together. We're supposed to come together as believers. And I can do church online or do it while I'm walking and listen, while I'm walking around the neighborhood with my wife on Sunday mornings, I think is a pale substitute for true fellowship.
Tell me about a time in your life that you faced, I'm not talking about in government, but just personally.
Sure. Tell
me about a time that you faced a difficult situation, a roadblock. We've all had roadblocks, and it's like, man, they're so stressful because you can literally see your destination, right down the road, but you can't get there. You got to drive 20 miles out of your way. Tell me about a time in your life that you personally experienced a roadblock and how you got around it.
That's a really good question. You said not counting in politics, but I'm going to cheat and still. Running for office is really hard. Forget about the winning part, not, but just as a person, okay? You're incredibly vulnerable. You're very visible. You have all these folks helping you, and there's this really strong sense of, I can't let down, so-and-so's given up X months to volunteer for me, and these folks have, recruited their friends, and they've stuck out their necks for me, et cetera. And there's a certain, at least for people like me who are wired the way I am, you care about, how you're seen. I'm saying that as a criticism of myself, that you worry about, how are people going to see me? If you're into Enneagram at all, the people that are kind of threes that are very aware of the world around them and how they're being viewed. And so for me, there was this huge sense of anxiety. And I don't remember walking into your studio. You have a plaque out that I can't remember exactly what you passed it 100 times or 1,000 times. So it says, don't worry about anything. But what's the plaque say? It's right outside right on your steps coming down.
Oh, the prayer quote.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I would say, Philippians says, be anxious for nothing, but everything, by prayer and supplication, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds. I wish I could say that's how I was. I wasn't anxious at all, but I was incredibly anxious for most of the campaign. And a friend came over the first time I ran for mayor, and a friend came over to my house, with about 3 or 4 weeks to go, and said, I need to talk to you. I said, I don't have time, man. I'm in the middle of the campaign, blah, blah, blah. He goes, I need to come talk to you. And so he came over and sat down. He said, it's going to be okay, right? I said, no, I don't. Have you seen some poll that I haven't? He said, I haven't seen a poll at all. But he said, but, the God of the universe who loves you and means you well is going to be the God of the universe the day after the election as well. And if you really believe that, then you shouldn't be all wrapped around the axle the way you are. And to me, that was, when I look back at going through hard things, going through my first mayor's campaign, the first governor's campaign, were hard, not because of the hard work. It's incredibly hard work. Not because of the being attacked by other people. Think, people are going to run negative commercials against me. That ends up to not being nearly as painful as you think it'll be. But mainly for that anxiety around what's going to happen here. And both of them have been great lessons learned for me in terms of God's faithfulness, and not just in that won the election. That's not the message is, are you going to trust God or not? And at least for me, when I get in those stressful, visible, vulnerable situations, I tend to want to wrestle it into submission. We're going to win this thing with blood, sweat, and tears. But God wants us to work, but He also wants us to trust Him in the result.
And tell me what role your wife has played in all this.
So key, so critical. I mean, it's Christy. First of all, both times I campaigned, really all 4 campaigns, went everywhere with me, and countless people would tell me, "I'm not sure about you, but I really like her, so I think I'll vote for you." But it really helps in several ways. Number one, Christy's really smart, so she brought insight. Number two, it's just great to have somebody with you that loves you and is for you regardless. And then number three, at the end of a long day when you're in a hotel room somewhere 250 miles from home and you've had a 12 or 14-hour day and you're going to have another one the next day, to have somebody that brings perspective to you. And say, I'm saying, gosh, I don't really like the way such and such event happened, and she'd say, well, tell me why, and then we'd talk through it, and I'd leave thinking either we need to change something, or maybe it was better than I thought it was.
So I just have to ask you, what is the underlying message of your book? And where does compromise, which seems to be a lost word.
Such a great question.
Maybe it'll disappear out of the dictionary soon.
Yeah, unfortunately. The underlying message is this, is that as believers in the public square, we need to develop our theology, kind of has a heavy tone to it, but our view of what are we supposed to act like. And we're supposed to be different than the world. The salt's supposed to be different than the meat. The light's supposed to be different than the dark. But we're also supposed to be people of humility. We can count up verses on humility and pride, and there's, we'll get in the upper hundreds in terms of those. And so we're supposed to be people who are humble because we know that we're not here because we deserve to be here, but out of a gift of grace. And then we're supposed to care deeply about what happens to the common good, to the public. And so all those things, this stuff matters. That'd be who we elect matters, number one. Number two, as Christians, we should enter it with the same way God's called us to act in every other way, with humility. And the third thing is we should be focused on actually solving problems. And you just put your finger on compromise has somehow become a bad word. But if you read our Constitution, compromise is kind of the subheading of the whole thing. The Constitution itself was a compromise, okay, of folks that wanted different things. And it's kind of the subtext throughout it is we're not all going to agree here, so let's figure out a way to do that. Here's the reality, and I usually start here in a conversation, but maybe this will be more toward one of the final points. This is a divided country. We're not just everybody know, oh yeah, I know we're divided and we're mad at each other. No, we're literally divided. I mean, the last 9 presidential elections have been decided by single digits. Only like one president has gotten more than 52% in the last 6 or 7 elections. Senate is literally 50-50 right now. The House is like a 4-vote difference. We're a divided country, okay? In that situation, you're going to have to get stuff done that lasts. You're going to have to compromise because we're going to bounce back and forth between Senate's controlled by the Republicans, now the Democrats. I mean, that's just the country we are. We're going to bounce back and forth. You can get some stuff done by, we're going to win that vote, 50-49 or 50-50 in the vice presidency. You can win some votes that way, but it's not going to last because as soon as it shifts back, it'll change. The big stuff we've done in the past, winning World War II, winning the Cold War, building the interstate system, Social Security, they've all been done with ways that involved compromise. And that's not a bad word. Again, I go back to James. Impartial, sincere, open to reason, full of mercy. Those are things that by their very nature says, I'm going to listen to you and see where there are ideas that I might incorporate into what I believe. So at the end, we can come out with the best answer, not just my answer.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that's really worked for me, because I go in and out of this, this tribal thing. But one thing that's really worked for me is I've gone on a news sabbatical before for as much as 18 months.
Wow. Okay.
And the only time I ever tune into the news is if there's some hurricane hitting and I want to see what's going on. That's it.
Right.
And the other thing is that I've learned to walk about 7 or 8 miles a night.
Yeah.
And half that time I'm trying to listen to things that inspire me, that put my mind to ease, or talk to friends, by the way, on the West Coast.
Right. Sure.
Rekindle those And the other thing I do is I talk to God.
Good for you. Yeah.
No, it's crazy. I mean, my neighbors are like, "Who's this guy talking to?" And because I literally talk to.
Right. Yeah. You're right.
And by the way, I'm usually doing this at like 10 or 11 at night.
They're calling to check to see if you've had your meds.
But it's amazing when you turn off the news, the tribal news thing. Right. And it's amazing when you can not get caught up on all this social media stuff.
Yeah. So, boy, may your tribe increase, okay? The folks who are reaching out, talking to friends, praying, learning other things to edify. Here's what we all have to realize about the news. The news, it's a business as well, right? And their job is to get you to listen to them more. And the best way to get you to listen more is to get you outraged. If I can get you really outraged at what I'm telling you, you're going to come back to listen to more. Because I'm telling you that the people you think are horrible are really horrible. And we have to realize that that's the culture that's being encouraged to grow. And I've talked to executives on both the left and right, Fox, MSNBC, CNN, et cetera, and they're basically they're trying to get you to hang in there and keep listening. And the more you listen and react, the more of that they're going to give you. And we'll set this aside, but this isn't about President Trump, but the news media, whether they liked him or not, they loved what he did for their ratings.
Oh yeah,
right, because he got the people who loved him, and the people who hated him, and you could go on CNN at 10 o'clock at night, and they'd have somebody just going off about how how horrible he is and turn to Fox, it'd be just the opposite. When they're both just preaching to people who already thought that, right? If you're watching Fox or CNN at 10 o'clock at night, you already know what you think. Nobody is convincing you. You're just looking for ammunition. You're not looking for information. And that's what they're counting on.
Well, I'll just say one final thing, and that is, if I'm going to fight for anything this fall, it's going to be for
Ohio State football.
Hey, how'd you guess?
First things, right? First things.
Got to get our priorities straight here.
Will they ever let you dot the I? I mean, are you that good a fan that they'll let you come dot the I at some point?
Maybe after this interview. Thank you for stopping by.
It is so good to be here. Like I said, thanks for letting me be here.
Thank you, Bill Haslam, the former governor of Tennessee, for being here on CIA. The book, once again, is called Faithful Presence, The Promise and the Peril of Faith in the Public Square, now available wherever you get your books. Make sure you pick it up. It is a great read. This has been CIA, Contagious Influences of America, from the producers of Keep the Faith. And hey, I have a favor to ask you. Please go out there and rate and review our podcast. That would really help us out. It would get the word out that we've got this great podcast, and I know a lot of you have done that. We've had some phenomenal reviews, but I would really appreciate that. 5 stars, please. 5 stars, and great critique. That would just tickle me to death. Okay. You can always check out our podcast, the lineup, at contagiousinfluencers.com. And of course, we've got great episodes of our radio show on KeepTheFaith.com. So please check those out too. And in the meantime, do me a favor, go out there and live that life in living color, because it sure is a heck of a lot more interesting than living it in black and white. We'll see you next time.